What is going on, everyone? Lauren Sisler here with AL.com, hanging out with Mike Rodak, who is on the Alabama beat for us at AL.com. And, we're just checking in with you. It's Tuesday. And, we're starting to shape up into what's looking like an actual college football season. Mike, I was on the first college football game of the season this past Saturday on ESPN, the FCS Kickoff in Montgomery, and it actually felt like football season is here. And so today, the big news for Alabama and other SEC schools, the TV schedules are being released, and it's starting to have a semblance that things are being pieced together. And pretty soon we'll sort of know where we can view and watch all of the football games. But we got a few on the schedule. So just take us through the schedule for Alabama and what we know so far in terms of where we could see them on ESPN as well as CBS.
Yeah, it's another one of the oddities of this season in that we have all these kickoff times at the beginning of the year compared to when we typically find them out, which is, I think, 12 days before each game. So for them, they already know 5 out of the 10 kickoff times for the year. And of those, 4 of them are going to be primetime games. And that includes the LSU game in November. It's a 5 o'clock start right after the third round of the Masters on CBS. So that should be a big sports day. The Georgia game will be in true prime time at 7 o'clock on CBS as well. That's in October. The home opener against Texas A&M will be at 2:30, that typical CBS game of the week time slot. And then 2 ESPN games, ESPN 1, the primary network, for their opener against Missouri on September 26th. That's at 6 o'clock. And then the Halloween game, which wasn't originally on Alabama's schedule. They were supposed to have a bye week that week. And then when everything got changed around, now they have a Halloween night game at 6 o'clock. So that will be under the lights on Halloween. Obviously, a little bit of a different feel because it won't be a full stadium. About 20% capacity is what they have planned for this year. And I think that's probably the sentiment of Alabama fans is that, where were all these primetime games last year? And I think people were really clamoring for them. There's only 2 primetime games on the schedule last year, Tennessee and Arkansas. They already have 4 out of the 10, and there's potential for more. I mean, they still have not announced the game time for the Iron Bowl. It's possible that's the afternoon game on CBS. It's possible that it gets moved to the night. And then there's some other games on that schedule too. Tennessee, Ole Miss, Kentucky, and Arkansas that don't have game times yet. And in theory, they could add some primetime games there. But it's just, it's tough just because I think fans really wanted some night games last year because of the lights and because of some of the heat in those September games last year. But it's just the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, let's be real. September is always pretty brutal in terms of the heat, on the field, especially here in the South. And, let's, to kind of give a glimpse to our viewers, sort of how it works with, and this year, of course, is going to be a lot different, but CBS typically gets sort of the first choice, right? They get the first pick as to sort of what games they want to cover. So, I don't know how this process was different this year, and maybe you have a little bit of insight into this, but did CBS kind of go down the list and pick essentially out of all, the 10 games that will be played for each SEC team? Like, we want this, and this, and this. I'm really curious to know what that process looked like this time around.
It seems so. I don't know that specifically, but just given the games that CBS has, it really seems like they have priority, and they still have that TV deal, the primary TV deal with the SEC for a couple more years until ESPN takes over, I believe, after the 2023 season. I have to double check that. But for CBS, I mean, you have the biggest SEC games of the year, Alabama, LSU. No matter what happens to LSU this year, and they took a couple more losses yesterday in terms of players opting out, that's still going to be one of the biggest games of the year for them. Alabama, Georgia, it could be the SEC game of the year. Obviously, the Florida-Georgia game is always a big one every year. CBS still has that. And LSU, Auburn as well. That's a pretty big one that they also have. So it really seems like CBS got the pick of the litter. And I mentioned before the Masters being on CBS in November, which is another oddity of 2020. Having that to lead into that Alabama LSU game is obviously something that they would want as a network. And then it seems like ESPN kind of cleaned up what was left after that.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, if you go down the schedule and for sort of the matchups for each week, it does appear that was sort of how things were sort of cherry picked, as you said, in determining what would be sort of that CBS matchup and then things kind of from there. And to your point, Alabama getting a lot of those primetime matchups. And I'm still kind of waiting to see the ratings from this Saturday in terms of what generated the audience generation of viewership, for the opening game of the season. But it'll be really interesting to see what those metrics look like as the season goes on, because you're going to have more eyeballs on the TV screens, right? Because you're going to have less people in the stands, and then of course less teams actually playing and less matchups. Throughout the day, and everything will kind of be condensed into obviously the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12 in terms of the Power Five. And so certainly interesting kind of how all that shakes up. And Mike, explain to me and explain to the viewers sort of the difference and the shakeup with that bye week, and why Alabama is now playing on Halloween as opposed to having that as a bye week.
Yes, just a consequence of when they changed the schedule from what it originally was, the 12-game schedule, going down to 10 games and making it conference only, and they shuffled every single game because of that. And as we know, there's no game that was really the same as the original schedule, with the exception of the Iron Bowl. And so that's just how it shook out, as their bye week. That's, I think, the same week it was last year. And probably a good time too for Alabama, coming off of 6 games straight to open the season. And then coming into that LSU game, which again, I believe was the same case last year, where they had the bye week going into the LSU game.
Yeah, and that actually, I think the bye week going to the LSU game has been sort of the trend in recent years for Alabama. That's always kind of been a storyline going into that one. Okay, so that's the schedule. Something else I want to talk to you more specifically on is what we saw happen yesterday on campus for the Crimson Tide football team. Many of the Alabama student athletes and coaches and the Alabama football team led a march through campus yesterday afternoon in a procession of power, for this racial justice movement. And it really started, I guess, at the Malmore complex and then ended at Foster Auditorium. You see the visuals there, the video of Coach Saban, leading this march. It was many coaches, many players leading this same march as they walked down the street, and then addressed everyone afterwards when they ended up at the Foster Auditorium. And I want to get your thoughts when you see these images and you see this visual. This is absolutely historic. And, just to see everyone coming together and trying to come together on one unified front, what are your overall thoughts and takeaways when you see something like this, something so historic on campus at Alabama?
Yeah, not being from Alabama myself, it's interesting to come in and learn about the history. For instance, my first time on campus, walking past the schoolhouse door where they had the end of that march yesterday, and learning about what happened there, just not having grown up around that history. And then to see this, you feel like it's another chapter in history, almost unfolding in front of your eyes. So that's interesting to watch. And I think the biggest question is going into it. We knew that the march was going to happen. They announced that, I think, on Friday. We didn't know what Nick Saban's role was going to be until he walked out. And, to see him in front, I think, and look, I got loads of tweets and emails, and, to be frank, some of the emails were disturbing, but I think one of the things that came up as a common theme was a lot of people saying that, Nick Saban was just doing it because he had to, because, he had to keep his players essentially. And, we spoke to Chris Owens today within the last hour, actually, and he was one of the leaders of the movement for Alabama, and the senior center. And he essentially said they didn't have to pull teeth with Nick Saban, that he wanted to be walking out front and to be leading the march. And I actually went back today and found a couple years ago when he was talking about being at Kent State in 1970 as a student, and obviously the protests there, and a couple of students being killed during those protests. And he was talking at the time about how traumatic that was for him, and how chilling that was, and how much it gave him an appreciation of those sort of events. And you do have to wonder, just knowing that own history that he witnessed 50 years ago, if that, played into his decision to take part in this history. And again, from everything that we've heard from players, it certainly seemed like, Nick Saban was very willing to walk out in front. And like I said, the emails I got, the tweets that I got, the tweets that his daughter, Kristen, got as well, seemed disturbing. And she even tweeted about that there was hate and threats that she received. But at the end of the day, I think Nick Saban stood up for what he felt was right. and he's one of the most powerful voices in this state, and certainly in college football. And that's I think that goes a long way for people to see him out there.
Absolutely, a very strong and powerful message and illustration that we saw yesterday, marching through campus there in Tuscaloosa. Mike, I appreciate your sentiments, your thoughts, your insight. Of course, as always, we continue on this road to college football as we kick things off on September 26th. And we'll definitely be back in touch as we get closer to what's looking more and more like a college football season. And I know a lot of people here cannot wait.